It began, as most buried horrors do, with something small. An old man's shovel striking something it shouldn't have. August 11th, 1862, the air thick with dew and dust, and Harold Inman, groundskeeper of Ashbridge Seminary for 22 years, was tending to the southern hedgerow where the garden met the woods. It was the hour just before dawn, when the fog draped the earth like a funeral veil, and even the birds held their breath. Harold was digging to transplant a hydrangea bush, but his spade didn't sync with the satisfying hush of damp soil. It scraped against something hard, flat, and unyielding. He paused, knelt, and clawed gently at the dirt with a gardener's reverence. His fingers met stone. Not the kind shaped by riverbeds or mountain erosion, but by human hands. A slab, rectangular, buried beneath a thicket of ivy. He uncovered more, a line of them, 7 in total, each evenly spaced, unmarked, and curiously aligned with the old chapel's foundation. It was strange, he thought, but the seminary was old. He assumed them to be forgotten boundary markers, or perhaps stones discarded from the long-demolished carriage house. Yet, over the next few weeks, the pattern grew more sinister. Every time Harold dug in the earth, be it to plant, uproot, or simply turn the soil, his spade found more stones, more slabs. Some just inches below the surface, others so deep he had to wrench the earth loose like it was hiding something it had no right to conceal. Eventually, one slab cracked, revealing beneath it a hollow cavity. Within lay human remains, small, delicate bones, perfectly preserved in the chilled New England soil. Harold reeled back in horror, his hat falling from his head, mouth agape as he stared into the face of something no groundskeeper should find alone. But he was no fool. He summoned the headmaster, Reverend Abbot Whiteley, who came with 4 priests and no esprit ned. Hessian, no cries of disbelief, no prayer. Just a quiet glance at the bones, and then a long silence, broken only by the rustling leaves above. Whiteley ordered the area sealed off at once. No word was to leave the grounds. The next day, the garden was bulldozed into a new shape, the stones buried deeper under fresh soil, the memory of that moment twisted into ash. But Harold could not let it go. Something in the earth had stirred him awake, had whispered to his bones that this seminary, this sacred place of divine study and prayer, sat atop a secret so old that even God had turned his face from it. Ashbridge Seminary had always held a strange stillness about it. Founded in 1819 by the monastic order of Perpetual Vigil, it had once been praised for its theological rigor and its rigid devotion to silence, purity, and submission. Set upon a cold Vermont hill, the seminary was built with stone pulled from the nearby quarry, gray, veined, and always cool to the touch, even in the height of summer. The building curved in a crescent around a central green known as the Pennines Courtyard. There was the chapel, the dormitory wing, the rector's hall, the scriptorium, and the underground cellar that students only referred to in whispers, the Red Hall. No one ever explained the name. It was simply inherited, passed down like a curse through generations of trembling lips. The students who came to Ashbridge were boys, mostly aged 10 to 16, sent by zealous families with rigid beliefs or by orphanages seeking to purge the worldly taint from young souls. Records were kept, at least outwardly, birth certificates, arrival logs, sermon attendance. But something always felt incomplete, off-center, as if the ledger itself refused to speak. Over time, names disappeared from the morning roll call without ceremony. One day, a student was there, and the next he was gone, his bunk made up tight. Lie, his belongings folded neatly in a trunk no one would claim. When asked, the staff would mutter that he had transferred to another seminary or gone home due to illness, but no farewell letters were ever received. No follow-up, just silence. And silence at Ashbridge was law. Whispers were punished. Questions were forbidden. Even dreams, when confessed aloud, were sometimes followed by weeks of penance in the Red Hall. Students who emerged were not quite the same. Their eyes darted quicker. Their voices stumbled. One boy, Malcolm Gray, came out with his right hand permanently twisted into a clawed shape. He never explained how it happened. He was gone within the week. Gone. Always gone. That was the word that kept surfacing as Harold dug deeper, not just in the earth, but in the seminary's past. After discovering the bones, he snuck into the library's record chamber. The archives stretched back over 40 years. Bound in leather, the volumes crackled with dust and secrets. But the pages didn't line up. Certain years, entire decades, had entries that began in January and stopped abruptly in June. No student deaths were recorded. No illnesses, no accidents, nothing. But Harold had lived there for over 2 decades. He had tended to the trees that stood taller than the bell tower. He remembered at least 8 funerals during his time, non-official, always held at dusk with the same priests, the same white robes, and always no names spoken. The congregation stood in silence, and afterward, the garden would be disturbed. That garden. That cursed garden. The one with the grass that grew faster than anywhere else, even in winter. The one the students were never allowed to enter. He had thought it was just decorative. But now he saw it for what it was, a mask of beauty overwrought. He kept digging, both in the soil and the paper. He found a torn page stuffed behind a broken wall panel in the archive room. It wasn't labeled, but the handwriting was rushed and frantic. It read, April 3rd, 1847. Third boy this month. No record kept. Whiteley says the body is to be committed to the hidden field. I asked for a priest's prayer, was told that silence is the only grace now. I think I saw him move. Eyes opened once. I can't sleep. The note was unsigned. Harold knew what he had to do. Late one night he took a lantern and returned to the garden with a small spade. He chose a corner he knew hadn't been touched. The earth was soft, too soft. He dug less than a foot and uncovered another slab. This one was newer, less worn. He pried it up and stared into a shallow grave that smelled faintly of myrrh and decay. Another child. A girl this time. He couldn't explain how he knew. Her dress was intact, her hands clasped as if in prayer, and a rosary melted into her chest like it had fused there. He dropped the lantern, screamed, and ran. The next morning, the garden was fenced off permanently. Whiteley announced that Harold had suffered a breakdown and would be taken to a convalescent home in New Hampshire. But no one ever saw Harold leave. His cottage was found locked from the inside, uneaten food on the table, and his shoes still by the door. The last journal entry in his personal notebook read, "There are 42 stones. I counted them. Each one a soul buried in silence. Each one a child who was never allowed to leave." The seminary claimed he fled. But whispers spread, even among the priests. The grass in the garden never stopped growing, not even in the deadest of winters. It pushed through frost, through snowdrifts, through the gravel they tried to smother it with. The students began calling it the breathing ground. They said if you stood there long enough, you'd feel the soil shift beneath your feet, like something below wanted to rise. One boy, Samuel Beckett, dared to sleep there one night on a dare. His friends found him the next morning standing perfectly still, eyes wide open, unmoving, mouth sewn shut with grass blades, he knee. Ver spoke again. Ashbridge was never investigated. The church held too much power, and too few outside ever questioned what happened behind its stone walls. But the garden grew, always grew. The chapel held services for ghosts. The choir sang one note too many, and the bell tower rang once each year on the same day, August 11th, the day Harold first struck stone. Some say the graves glow faintly on that night. Others say you can hear weeping if you press your ear to the soil. But no one digs there anymore, because the grass never sleeps. And what lies beneath Ashbridge Seminary isn't just forgotten. It's waiting. They called it a place of learning, a place of discipline, a place where boys were shaped into holy men. But by the time you heard the first voice that didn't belong to anyone, you understood. Ashbridge Seminary wasn't built to teach. It was built to erase, to dissolve identity like chalk beneath rain, to mold flesh and mind through rituals so old they forgot their own origin. The first to speak of the voices was Thomas Ellery, a pale, delicate boy with a face too gentle for the world of iron-fisted clergy and marble-eyed priests. He had arrived in the winter of 1853, orphaned by fever and consigned to Ashbridge for the good of his soul. On the 23rd morning of his stay, during the first recitation of matins, he lifted his eyes in the chapel not to the crucifix but to the rafters. He wasn't praying, he was listening. Afterward, he asked the others, "Who sang the descant? The woman's voice?" But the others stared at him blankly. There had been no women present, no voices out of place. Only the slow, thunderous cadence of Latin chants led by Father Calvin and the trembling chorus of terrified boys. Thomas insisted, said it was beautiful, high and sorrowful, singing words that weren't in Latin at all, but in a language his mind couldn't hold on to once the echo faded. He said it was coming from the locked door above the altar, the one no student was allowed near. They beat him that day for speaking during Silendet, Teat, hour. But the voices didn't stop. They returned every morning, soft, layered, too many to count. It wasn't long before others began to hear them too. Sometimes it was weeping during evening psalms. Other times, a choir overlapping the living one, always one note behind, like a shadow. Students began to dread morning worship. Some feigned illness. Others bit their own tongues bloody to avoid going mute like Samuel Beckett. But most simply prayed harder, desperate not for salvation, but for silence. Then came the footsteps, those impossibly slow, deliberate ones on the floor above the dormitories, where no students were allowed. The older boys whispered that it was the penitent choir, the ones who sang even after death. No one knew what that meant until a bitter November morning, when a fire inspection forced staff to unseal a boarded wing of the scriptorium. That was when the crawlspace was found. Wedged behind an old confessional booth, sealed with iron nails and wax, was a hatch leading down to a narrow passage that shouldn't have existed in the building plans. It was only 2 feet wide, just large enough for a child to crawl through. At the end of it, 27 feet in, the fire chief found a leather-bound journal, a bundle of old cassocks soaked in dried blood, and 3 candle stubs arranged in a perfect triangle. The journal was turned over to the seminary. The priests said nothing, for months. But rumors leak like blood through linen, and one student, Henry Tallow, would later describe what he saw when he broke into Headmaster Whiteley's office after curfew. The journal open on the desk, pages filled with scrawled entries under the name Brother Lenius, dated 1825 to 1832. The entries were chilling, detailing penitential harmonies, vocal scourging, and a ritual called Throat's Offering, where select students were ordered to fast for 7 days, then sing Und. They collapsed, as an act of spiritual purification. Those who failed were made to wear lead collars for 3 months. Those who succeeded were invited to the second choir. But here was the strangest part. Not a single name recorded in Brother Lenius's journal existed in the seminary's official rosters. Not one. Not even Lenius himself. When questioned by a rare visiting bishop months later, Whiteley claimed the journal was a forgery from a troubled student, and then ordered it burned. But students remembered. They whispered of the second choir, how it wasn't just metaphorical, how it rehearsed in the walls, how the chanting voices never had footsteps to accompany them. And when a new group of 12 boys were admitted in the spring of 1854, one noticed the portrait gallery had been rearranged. A row of small paintings, each of a different boy with uncannily similar features, had been moved to the western stairwell where few would notice them. None of the names beneath them matched any student currently enrolled. One evening, during a rare thunderstorm that cut power to the chapel lanterns, a group of boys found themselves huddled on the upper balcony, awaiting dismissal from evening prayers. That's when they saw it. A door they'd never seen before, embedded in the rafters behind the altar's cross, slightly ajar. It wasn't large. It couldn't have been more than 4 feet high. But from it poured the unmistakable echo of singing. Not hymns. Not Latin. Something slower, hollow, a minor key that made the heart race and the throat close. One boy, Edwin Kress, swore he saw pale hands open the door further, then pull back like a curtain. No one else saw this. But that night, Edwin tore out every page of his Bible and burned it in the lavatory. He was sent to the Red Hall and never returned. Within days, his portrait appeared in the stairwell. No name, just his face. Lips parted slightly as if mid-song. Over time, students began recording what they heard. Illegally. One boy smuggled in an Edison-style phonograph. He left it running near the locked choir door one night. The next morning, the wax cylinder was shattered and melted. But before it was destroyed, he swore to 2 others he had played back 15 seconds of tape. And it was not just singing, but a layered chant made of dozens of voices repeating the same phrase over and over. Non revertetur, it shall not return. When word of the phrase spread, an older priest panicked, broke down during Mass, and began clawing at his ears, screaming, "They still sing! They never stopped!" He was taken away, and no one spoke of him again. But the phrase persisted. Non revertetur. What was it that would not return? The soul? Innocence? Or silence itself? In spring of 1855, a new student arrived. August Penmore, a freckled, sharp-eyed boy from Charleston whose parents claimed he had the gift of hearing. He was placed in Dormitory B, adjacent to the bell tower. From his first night, he said the bell rang when it shouldn't. Always once. Just once. At 2:37 a.m., the priests denied this. Said the mechanism was disconnected after a lightning strike in 1849. But students across the West Wing began to confirm it. One bell, at exactly the same moment, every single night. August began transcribing what he heard. He claimed the voices weren't random. They were structured, layered. A chant, yes, but also a call and response. One voice always led. Always female. He wrote, "She sings first. Then the others follow. She is in pain. They are not. They only echo, but she is real." He began speaking in tongues during breakfast, drawing symbols with ashes during sermon. By summer, August was speaking less and humming more. He stopped eating meat, refused to sit with others. When questioned by faculty, he simply said, "She's teaching me to hear better." One night, during a lightning storm, August climbed the bell tower. Witnesses said he stood atop the spire barefoot, his eyes rolled back, mouth open in silent scream. When a teacher reached the top, August was gone. No sign of fall, no blood, no trace. Only a single page left behind, pinned beneath the bell. The choir sings where God cannot reach. His parents were never contacted. No report was filed. That same week, the seminary's remaining records of choir assignments between 1819 and 1856 were destroyed in a clerical fire. But in the Red Hall, which was opened only once during a forgotten inspection, one of the workers reported a sealed door marked a Schola Silentium. On its surface, carved into the stone, were 142 tally marks. To this day, no one has been able to identify who carved them or when. The room was resealed within the hour. Today, long after Ashbridge closed, visitors still report hearing music within the ruins. Faint, always distant, and never the same melody twice. Recordings taken from the chapel's collapsed altar area show anomalies, frequencies beyond human hearing range, pulses in the floor that register like a heartbeat. Ghost hunters call it cursed. Historians call it an urban legend. But the locals, the ones who've lived near Ashbridge for generations, know better. They don't walk near the old walls after dusk. They don't hum, and they don't sing lullabies to their children. Because they say the choir is always listening, and if you sing too sweetly, too closely, or too late at night, it might just sing back. It was always the second bell, that faint, unexplainable chime that rang not from the steeple where the rusted mechanism had long since rotted into disuse, but from somewhere lower, deeper, a tone round and thick like metal dragged against stone, a sound that came not to mark time, but to erase it. At Ashbridge Seminary, the first bell was for prayer, the second was for removal, and by the time you heard a "takee," it was already too late to run. They called it many things over the decades. The knight's toll, the phantom ring, even the widow's sound by some of the older boys. But among those who knew the truth, those who had lived through the slow, silent process of watching their peers vanish one by one, the name was simpler, colder. The disappearance protocol. It was never spoken of openly by the priests, never admitted in sermons or documented in official records. But it moved like a shadow beneath everything, the teaching, the penance, the prayer, and those who remained knew better than to ask what happened to the boys who went missing after curfew. It wasn't just that they disappeared. It was how completely, how clinically, how precisely it was done. Beds remade, trunks emptied, names struck from rosters, paintings removed from the gallery before dawn. Even the other students began to forget their faces, their voices, like some dulling fog settled over memory itself. But there were always those few, those resistant to forgetting, those who remembered enough to notice the pattern. Chief among them was a cleric barely remembered today, save for the scraps of his writings and a single smudged portrait in the forgotten archives. Brother Elias Merewin, assistant archivist from 1838 to 1851. He had come to Ashbridge from a small Benedictine school in Maine, a gentleman with poor eyesight, a permanent stoop, and the kind of voice you lean into to hear. For years, he filed records without question, but something gnawed at him. Too many names that never aged, too many faces that vanished from rolls, and too many journals found in empty bunks, written in trembling hands, filled with cryptic warnings, scratched-out prayers, and strange drawings of doors where no doors should be. Elias began compiling what he called the Pattern of Absence, a quiet audit of all missing boys from 1820 to 850. His research revealed more than whispers, specific intervals, specific ages, specific traits. The youngest removed was 10, the oldest 17. All were male. All had, at some point, defied silence by asking too many questions, by exploring restricted areas, or by being caught reading texts not found in the seminary's approved canon. Elias discovered that of the 463 boys recorded as having ever enrolled at Ashbridge in the first 30 years, only 206 were accounted for by graduation or transfer. The rest? Nothing. No departure records, no letters, no grave markers, just empty air. The number that chilled him most was 142, the exact number of unmarked slabs Harold Inman had found in the soil decades later. Elias wasn't just afraid, he was determined. In 1846, he began secretly copying pages from forbidden books stored in the sealed scriptorium annex, volumes older than the seminary itself, bound in calfskin, and written in a liturgical dialect that merged Latin with something else, something not of this world. These books referenced something called praeceptum occultandi, the concealment mandate. It outlined procedures for maintaining divine order through selective silence. It mentioned a red corridor, a rite called vocal erasure, and most chillingly, a process in which undesirable vessels were hymnally transmuted, an act believed to preserve spiritual purity by removing dissonant chords from the sacred whole. Elias's notes became obsessive, scratched between the margins of hymnals, in the spines of broken books, even etched into the soles of his shoes in case he was ever taken. He created a coded ledger that tracked which students vanished, when they vanished, and, most disturbingly, what preceded their removal. There was always a trigger, a second bell, heard only by the marked. That bell was followed by a night of unrelenting silence. No wind, no insects, no creaking floorboards. Then came the summoning. 3 knocks on the dormitory door. The student would rise, compelled or confused, and walk out barefoot, still half-leap. Some were seen heading toward the red hallway, a narrow corridor behind the chapel known only to clergy, and rarely spoken of aloud. It was lined with old nailed portraits and a single window that looked out onto nothing but stone. No one who entered was seen again. But Elias didn't just track the vanishings. He tried to stop one. In the spring of 1850, a student named Caleb Worthen, a curious, bright boy who asked too many questions about the sealed gallery, heard the bell. He told Elias, whispering in the chapel, "I think they've chosen me. I dreamed of the corridor again. She was waiting, dressed in white." Elias locked Caleb in the archive room and sat outside with a Bible in his lap, determined to protect the boy until morning. But somewhere between the 3rd and 4th hour of night, Elias fell asleep. When he woke, the door was open. The Bible was gone. So was Caleb. All that remained was a single candle stub and a page torn from Elias's own notebook. The bell is not heard with ears, but with memory. We all heard it once. We just forgot how. That night, Elias penned what would become his final entry. He wrote it beneath the floorboards of the cellar archive, in an envelope labeled "For the One Who Remembers." It read, "The pattern is complete. Every 47 days, another taken. 142 in all. The church knows. They sanction it. They have a name for it. Ashbridge Disappearance Protocol. There is a second ledger, bound in red wax. Only Whiteley holds the key. I've seen the names. They are marked before they arrive. I was one of them once, but I aged out. My voice was too deep. Now they come for me not to erase, but to silence. I hear the second bell. I will go, but not quietly. If you read this, listen. Find the soil that breathes. Dig where the grass never dies. The truth is below." The next day, Elias was gone. The staff said he had returned to his abbey, the Stud. Innites were told nothing. The red hallway was sealed again. But the silence grew heavier, like ash in the lungs of every boy who dared remember. In 1973, during a brief, unauthorized excavation of the seminary ruins by local historians, a sealed compartment was found beneath what remained of the altar. Inside it, a red, wax-bound ledger containing exactly 142 names, each with a date, a hymn number, and a phrase beneath. Erased to preserve harmony. No birth dates, no families listed, just first names and last initials. At the bottom, in ink darker than the rest, one final entry. Elias M. Choir entry denied. Alternate removal sanctioned. The ledger was quietly taken by the diocese, never seen again. But the historians had copied 3 pages before its confiscation. One of them bore the name Caleb W., marked Dream Disobedience. Another, Thomas E., marked Vocal Descent. The last page simply read, August P., marked Harmonic Imbalance, result, Ascension. What ascension meant was never clarified, but that year, in the dead grass near the chapel ruins, 7 markers were uncovered, each stone etched only with an outline of a child's mouth, open in silence. Today, they remain unmarked. Visitors still claim to hear the bell only once, and never at the hour it should ring. Local children are warned not to answer if someone knocks 3 times after midnight. And in the museum where the salvaged seminary doors are displayed, a recording once captured a strange anomaly. A low voice, deep and wavering, saying one phrase again and again. Translated from Latin, it means, to remember is to summon, and those who summon disappear. It should have been a routine restoration, an old stone chapel, decaying on the hill above Ashbridge Hollow, slated for preservation under Vermont's Historical Trust. But when the backhoe struck bone, everything stopped. It was the summer of 1971, blistering hot, and the ground beneath the seminary's ancient chapel should have been granite, or at worst frost-split shale. But what they found instead was soft, disturbed soil packed with the calcium, iron, and something else the forensics team would later describe only as unusually organic sediment, a phrase used when even science flinches from its own discovery. The first skeleton was small, likely male, early teens, arms crossed over a rib cage crushed inward as if by great pressure or, more disturbingly, by deliberate force. Within the week, the construction team uncovered 12 more, then 19, then 37, each buried in rows no one remembered digging, beneath a foundation that, according to every architectural record, should have sat atop solid rock. The Vermont State Police were summoned. The Vatican was notified. For a brief window, the world turned its eyes toward Ashbridge, expecting scandal or at least explanation. But what came was silence, cold and immediate. The diocese issued a brief statement about historical burial practices, filed a preservation injunction, and blocked all further excavation on the site. The bones, 142 confirmed bodies by the final count, were quietly collected, sealed in crates, and stored in a private facility with no access granted to independent researchers. But even before the soil was resealed and the chapel doors bolted shut, something had begun to shift, something no administrative decree could bury. The first to notice were the workers, the men who handled the bodies. They began reporting vivid nightmares of being buried alive, of choir music sung backward in candlelit halls, of children with missing,